Don't open the door, son. Justin Hammond disappeared without a trace on October 15, 2019. He was 15 at the time he went missing. Long searches yielded no results. The only thing left of him was his story. A door. It might be the last thing I will see in my life. I had locked it myself and fallen into a trap as a result. If you are watching this, know that I am still here, in this cursed house. My mother and I had moved not that long ago. If I had known back then what was hiding inside it, I would never have walked in. The walls of the old townhouse were stripped to bricks, and the floorboards creaked balefully if you stepped on them. But still, it was quite habitable. There was even a playground overgrown with dry grass in the backyard. I had been going around the house for several hours, trying to clean it up, but there was so much dust everywhere that a week wouldn't have been enough to get rid of it all. I was tired and collapsed into a chair. My eyes suddenly fell on a barely noticeable crack in the opposite wall. There was something behind it. I came closer and smelled something musty and rotten. After examining the wall, I realized that there was a door. The lock clicked. It wasn't locked. Steep steps were leading down. What could be there? Taking a heavy pipe just in case, I headed down. It turned out there was a small basement without windows. It could be called spacious if it wasn't littered with all sorts of junk. Dusty boxes were scattered everywhere, and cabinets filled with papers and old newspapers were standing against the walls. I sat down on a suitcase and started sorting through the yellowed magazines. They were at least 30 years old. I was so immersed in reading them that I stopped paying attention to the world around me. All of a sudden, I heard a sharp sound behind me. I flinched and almost screamed in surprise. Turning around, I saw that old notebooks and newspaper clippings had spilled out of a box. I decided it had probably fallen off a shelf. But why now? For so many years it had been standing in its place, but it had decided to fall at that moment. I started to study the contents of the box. The notes in the notebooks were in a language I didn't know, so I switched to looking at the newspapers. They were even older than the magazines and described strange events that had been going on in some house. I looked at the black and white photo, and a chill ran down my spine. I saw our house in it. Horrified, I started to read. No one knew how old the house was or who had built it. The locals felt like it had always been there, and strange things had constantly been happening in it. The thing was, locals often went missing in it. When the police arrived, they found a working radio, a boiling kettle, or a set table. But there wouldn't be a living soul inside. The whole thing was very weird and creepy. After all, right now, I was in that very house. I hadn't finished reading yet when I suddenly heard my mother's voice upstairs. "Justin, I'm home!" I threw everything back into the box and got out of the basement. Of course, what I had learned from the newspapers got me thinking, but I absolutely did not believe in anything supernatural and decided that journalists had made up those stories for the tabloids. But I was very wrong. That same night, something strange happened. I woke up from a terrible creaking sound. It seemed to be coming from the street. I came up to the window and looked out at our backyard. It was dark, but I could see the swings moving by themselves. One might have thought that the wind was to blame, but not a branch on the trees was moving. How was it possible? And then the swinging stopped abruptly, as if someone invisible had gotten off them. At the same moment, I heard a disgusting sound that sent chills down my spine. It was as if a mangy cat was mewing madly, or someone was scraping something sharp against a glass. I heard a strange voice in my head. That's when I saw a strange shadow right beneath the window. It was looking right back at me. It had a huge black hole where its mouth should have been. That's where the disgusting sound was coming from. I jumped back in horror and turned on the light. When I looked out of the window again, I didn't see anyone. Perhaps I had just imagined it. I spent the rest of the night with the lights on, wondering what it could have been. The next day, after my mom had left for work again, I decided to solve the mystery of the house. I couldn't stop thinking about the entries in the diaries, and then I decided to use Google Translator. I took my smartphone and started to translate page after page. It turned out to be in German, and the person who had written it had told the story of their family. They had moved into this house in the previous century. At first, everything had been going well, but then the house owner's wife had found a secret room and opened it. After that, strange and frightening things started to happen in the house. At night, ugly sounds could be heard, and a strange shadow could appear in dark corners. The owner of the house had even tried to call specialists to exorcise the uninvited guest, but they hadn't succeeded, and the shadow had begun to appear even more often. Every day, it would become a bit clearer. They could even see it belonged to a human-like creature. It had long, thin arms and hands with incredibly thin and sharp fingers. When the creature opened its huge black mouth, a blood-curdling meowing and disgusting rotting stench would come out of it. The last entry in the diary had been written with a trembling hand. Don't trust it. If you fall into its trap, you are doomed. There were only empty pages after that. I felt uneasy, but then I heard the front door slam. Justin, I'm home! Phew, I was so glad to see my mother back. Now I wasn't alone and wouldn't be so scared. I'll admit it. After everything that had happened, I had started to believe in all sorts of craziness. I ran to greet my mother, when my smartphone suddenly rang in my pocket. I looked at the screen and stopped dead in my tracks. My mother was calling me. Hello? I croaked out. Justin, hey, I'm working late today. I heard a familiar voice. My blood ran cold. Who was at the door then? I went out into the hallway on shaking legs. There was no one there. Suddenly, I heard that sound again, as if a possessed cat was screeching. I heard in my head once again. I saw a skinny shadow standing right behind me in the mirror. Beside myself with horror, I rushed out of the house. I ran as fast as I could. I only came to my senses in a cafe nearby and immediately called my mother. Half an hour after that, she was there. I immediately told her everything I had learned about our new house and about the nightmarish creature living inside it, but she didn't believe me. No matter how much I protested, She dragged me home. It was as if nothing had happened there. I brought the box of newspaper clippings and showed them to my mother. I'm not making it up, it's all true. I wanted her to believe me, but my mother was adamant. Throw out all this stuff and stop messing with my head. I spent the whole evening trying to convince her to leave the house and spend the night somewhere else. I felt that we were in great danger there and simply would not survive the night, but she wouldn't listen to me. I couldn't sleep when the night came. I sat in my room, holding a heavy pipe at the ready and anxiously peering into every shadow. Hour after hour passed like that. The house was quiet, and I felt my eyes starting to close with tiredness. I had almost fallen asleep when I suddenly heard a terrifying scream. It was my mother. I immediately rushed to her. She was sitting on her bed and pointing at something in the darkness. It's here! I saw it! We turned on the lights all over the house at once. I told my mother that we needed to quickly get out of there and never come back. But my mother refused to do that. This house cost me way too much. I'm not going anywhere. Why doesn't this thing go away instead? With those words, she grabbed the box of the newspaper clippings and ran out of the house. She decided that would help her get rid of the monster in our house. She had been gone for about a couple of minutes, when suddenly I heard her scream from the streets. Had the monster caught her? Was I really alone in the haunted house again? But at that moment, my mother ran inside with her face twisted in horror. She immediately closed the door behind her and pressed her back against it. That thing is here. It's coming. The next second, I heard bangs on the door from the other side. Don't let it back in, screamed my mother. The bangs on the door became stronger and stronger. I realized that it wouldn't hold for much longer. We had to move. I quickly opened the secret door to the basement and showed my mother where we could hide. She ran after me. I locked the basement door from the inside, and we went downstairs. Once we were on the stairs, I heard the front door crack and get kicked in. That monster was back in the house. I started looking for us. I knew it. I felt it. Everything was silent. My mother was hiding among the boxes behind my back. I was waiting for what would happen next. That's when someone started to try and yank the door of the basement open. "Son, don't open the door no matter what," said my mother pitifully. I hadn't been going to do it. Why had she said that? And why had she called me son? She never called me that. That's when I heard a voice, up there behind the door. "Justin, open the damn door!" It was my mother's voice. At that second, I felt more afraid than I had ever been before. I heard the same sound again behind me. Like thousands of mad demons were laughing at me. I stood rooted to the spot and was afraid to turn around. I could feel its terrible breath on the back of my neck. And when a withered hand with long, sharp fingers came to rest on my shoulder, I realized that I wouldn't be leaving the basement alive. The last thing I remember was a knock on the door. Upstairs. It was getting farther and farther away from me. Although, hold on a second. Is it just me? Or is someone really knocking on your door? Take off your headphones. Listen.